Hello and welcome to the reality show. I'm back. I've just been on the Daily Objective and now I am on the reality show. Today with me is John Voss and Marco and Richard. Hey guys, how you doing?
Hey,
Good.
So we already have covered this on the Daily Objective, but we're gonna hear more opinions here. We're gonna cover the what was it called exactly? The resolution to condemn anti-Semitism on university campuses and the testimony of university presidents. So we already covered that hearing last week. I believe we had John then. I don't think we had Marco and Richard then, did we? No. So we'll also hear your opinions about that specifically. But first, we have artists for Hamas. So this is a bit older from what I understand, but basically what we've seen is a lot of artists coming up and basically signing an open letter, sort of, yeah, condemning Israel's actions and supporting Gaza or supporting Palestinians. Although with this, it's always hard to say. So let me just read what exactly it said. So the letter said, "We call for an end to the killing and harming of all civilians, an immediate ceasefire, the passage of humanitarian aid into Gaza, and the end of complicity of our governing bodies in grave human rights violations and war crimes." And the reason why I brought up that this is a bit older is this was only, I believe, couple weeks after October 7th. So while hearing this position today might be, I guess, slightly more understandable. It's a very, it's not nice to hear it just a couple of weeks after it had happened and everyone had it still in recent memory. So before I say my things, let's go to John. Should I ask if you've signed on to this open letter?
no, I have not. Um, yeah, it's not surprising to me whatsoever in the least. All you have to do is go on Facebook and look up Artists for Palestine, and then also look up Artists for Israel. The uh, the number of people, artists that support Palestine is 100-fold. Like articles constantly, like it's crazy. And then there's maybe one or two pages with Artists for Israel that post a couple things here and there. So I wasn't surprised at all by that fact. Being an artist and going to school for art, I know how art education is completely submersed in the whole Marxist anti-exploitative slash being exploited uh narrative. So it's something even back when I went to school in 2000, when I graduated college in 2005, 85% of the artists I graduated with were postmodernist type, the work that they created, there were a few realists, but a lot of them were, you know, the stuff you see in most modern museums now. So I'm not surprised at all. But in colleges, the arts are lumped under the humanities. So you're getting all that stuff indoctrinated into you right from the beginning. And it's tied together with art so closely. But ultimately, I also think artists are tend to be drawn to the underdog narrative. They like to see themselves as the starving artist, and they also like to see themselves as the rebel and the one that changes culture. But they can't see that happening with. You have to be the underdog to be the rebel, I think, in their eyes. So they buy into all these narratives, and ultimately, altruism and collectivism rule the culture, and artists are uh, the ones that bring the ideas to the ground and show you what the ideas mean. So, it's the same idea as why are so many atheists on the left? Why are so many artists on the right or on the left? But it's all tied with um, having nothing to replace the religious morality with. So they just pick up what they've been indoctrinated with and go with it.
So I'm gonna move on to Marco and Richard in a second, but first, let me actually ask you, John, one more question. So from the names I've seen, it was people like Robert Del Naja, Taishani, Lucy Skyer. I'm not really well versed in this sort of environment, but do you recognize any of these names? Are those like
No, not at all. I'm assuming they're all postmodernists. So, and I don't follow postmodern art at all. So I wouldn't know the names, but yeah, I'm not surprised at all that um that no one we know would know these names, you know. They're just there's a very strong elitist
hmm,
uh vein in the art world right now. And you know, if you're not chosen based on the quality of your work, you're chosen on your ideology. Clear and simple.
I should also mention that more than 2,000 leading, and not specifically just artists, but like actors, musicians, writers, filmmakers, and all sorts of creative types have signed on to this open letter. But let me move on to Marco. What do you think about this letter when you saw it? Is it also, was this the first time you saw it when we sent the topic today, or did you hear about it back in
Uh,
the October?
yeah, the specific letter is the first time I hear about it, but you kind of read in the news all the time that artists are in favor of some lefty Marxist cause. So you know, again, you don't even register anymore. As John said, these guys are. Uh, uh, every time I see these kind of names that nobody recognizes, I wonder, well, how many of these are really artists? Yeah, some of these will be artists. The rest of them are just, you know, people who produce that kind of perceptual bath that it's just something stuck on a piece of something else, and they sell it as you know, a representation or a concept or some crap like that. And frankly, you know, all the modernist, postmodernist, and modern crap we've seen here and seen it times and times again. These guys, most of them, trying to push political ideas, and you know, wrap it up in some flowers or press bits of paper or glue or whatever, and then pretend they've got an answer of art, and then tell you what it's about. But you know, we objectivists know that's not exactly art. To have a piece of art, you have to have a piece of yourself first of all clear in your mind, and a piece of judgment about reality. Most of these guys don't even represent reality, so you know, pushing the definition of art is quite fanciful.
I should before we go to Richard, I should just mention, yes, now we know what is art because we've spent last, I think, about 4 weeks on the ARCUK Philosophy Forum discussing what is art. It was not because we spent all the time on those questions. It was because what is art was always the last question, and we just never got to it because we covered all the other questions. Uh, for those who don't know, the Philosophy
Till the
Forum.
final section when we spent some time discussing it. But yes.
For those who
Sure.
don't know, Philosophy Forum, it's a perk of Platinum members. It's basically a place where we discuss a lot of things that even might have an answer in objectivism, such as what is art. Everyone knows, it's a artist recreation of reality according to his metaphysical value judgments. We all know this phrase, but what does it mean really? So make sure to become a member so you can join this. But let's go to Richard. Richard, what do you think about this open letter?
Well, excuse me. Well, as as John said there, art is downstream of the culture, as is politics. And what we're seeing at the moment, it speaks to the wider thing that's going on in society, which is that activism comes first. It's activism before art. It's activism before journalism. It's activism before business. In all of those fields, you're seeing that all the time. And of course, art itself, the way it's approached these days, being based on feelings and faith, being based on the emotive and the superficial, of course it's going to lend itself to a shallow interpretation that's going to swing in one particular direction based on the herd. I mean, I think you're seeing from a business side of things, you're seeing a lot of different galleries and organizations struggling to contend with the fact that this political issue has suddenly come to the fore. So, for example, here in London, the Listen Gallery had to suspend or chose to suspend, postpone an exhibition by the Chinese artist Ai Weiwei, which is an artist I have actually heard of, who said some pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel things, and the gallery decided it wasn't apposite to go ahead with it. And similarly, in other fields, you've had in the Frankfurt Book Fair, the big book fair that occurs in Europe every October, where editors and fiction writers and literary agents all meet in Frankfurt in Germany. They were about to give a prize to a Palestinian writer, and they chose to postpone that as well. And galleries in New York, like the 92NY, have also had to, because they're a Jewish gallery, have chosen to not have on their stage the same artists that they would have had prior to this. So you've got it moving in all directions, and lots of organisations having to consider, is being political like we were 3 months ago quite so good for us now? And it becomes a complex, messy business for all of them.
So let me ask John one more question. So you mentioned studying art, you encountered a lot of basically it being dominated by the leftist politics. Can you tell us if, especially as an objectivist, at what point have you started gravitating towards objectivism, and can you understand this sort of leftist point of view, or like why it's so appealing for artists to go for the more left side of politics?
It's something I struggle with understanding myself. I didn't read Ayn Rand till towards the end of college, so I was just kind of a floater. Before that, I didn't really get the postmodern stuff, but I didn't see it as a threat or anything, or anything to be concerned about. But yeah, I think that the artists ultimately want to rebel and against oppression, and the biggest oppressor is reality. So I think that's why there's a huge push to not do realism, that's for sure, and that underlies everything. There's not even a lot of explicit talk about it. It's just, you need to be free from the constraints of reality and perception and, reason. Like Marco and Richard were saying about it's very emotive, they tie art to emotion. So then, whatever you're feeling at the time, whatever is a hot cultural, emotional subject comes to the front, and the artists, want to exemplify that. But I think some artists too are drawn to the collectivism simply because they're a little bit afraid to be alone. Kind of being an artist is somewhat of an alone activity a lot of the times. So I think they seek other people out more than they need to, just to counterbalance that. So they buy into the collectivist stuff. But then also these galleries banning the Palestinians from showing, which is perfectly fine and within their right. It almost feeds into their narrative. We're being oppressed by these elite galleries to not show our work. We're being censored and all this stuff, and it feeds their narrative of being oppressed and the underdog, and society looks down on us, and they go with that, they run with that. So
what I would say, or at least what I've always thought, why sort of the artist types are being drawn to the left side of politics, is I always thought of artists basically being like the more sort of aggressive, more like having passion for something, like trying to push boundaries. And I think that always is gonna gravitate towards sort of the left side of politics rather than the more conservative, let's not go too fast, let's not be too radical, which I'm wondering if that might change, since we've seen, especially with figures around like Trump, a more radical, more a bit ugly side of even the right side of politics. And I'm wondering if we'll get to the point where it actually reminds me of, just as a complete side point, but there's basically one game which is like takes place in the World War II setting, and it has a specific mod which puts out an alternative universe for basically our whole planet. And this sort of artist side of you is actually in that universe specific with the right-wing side of politics. I think they specifically call this the avant-garde, like the avant-gardist, and it's like more like right became much more radical, and because of that, the artist became more associated with the right-wing side of politics. So I'm wondering if we'll see this sort of shift. But let me ask Marco, for either side, do you think this sort of art is being closer to the left will ever change, or what do you think why they are being attracted to the more left wing side of politics?
I think a big component behind it is education. I used to work in a college, and we used to do an arts foundation course. And at the end of the year, there was the students' show kind of thing, and the stuff produced was just laughable. I mean, there's nothing that you would call. When I was at primary school, that would have been a result of a craft session, not certainly a year studying art, but. The point is that these guys tend to be massive, often phonies, super second-handers, recycling ideas, kind of half digested, half thoughts. And to be honest, it's the art, because they're constantly told, be who you are, you don't need to justify what you feel, your feelings are coming ahead. It's a kind of screwed up epistemology, this kind of screwed up way of seeing reality that is generating the kinds of culture we have nowadays. These guys find art the softest side of things, where they can effectively, most people can actually blug their way through it. It is a way for the inept and incompetent to hide, because there's no barriers to overcome. I find particularly entertaining how an artist never makes a statement by getting a hard job, like in a building site or in a farming settings, where you really have to work hard in order to get to the end of the day. But they always go for the softy thing, the airy fairy stuff. That betrays more than allegiance to idea, allegiance to a cushy life and an easy way of making a buck, really.
Yeah, and I think it's a shame, because a really great artists are therefore don't get the prominence that they should, for sure. I mean, there's an annual prize here in the UK called the Turner Prize for Art. It's an international joke, basically, for anyone outside of the art world. And it's basically everybody asks themselves, what crap has it been given to this year? Now, in this particular case, it was given to an artist who'd done a few scrappy bits of Union Jack and some barbed wire and put them in the corner of a room. And that was their art. That was and their piece was called something like The State of Britain Today, with these scrappy flags and the barbed wire. And what's also relevant about this artist, they're trans. So what have you got here? All have you got is total conventionality and safeness. It's exactly on message for everything that they think at the moment in the key culture. Trans, anti-UK, anti-Britain, all of that stuff is just, there's nothing daring about it even. And yet they seem to think they're daring at the same time, which is, and the same is true with all of the Palestinian stuff. They're not taking a a risky stance. They're taking what they think is the safer stance based on, a look at Twitter.
Yeah, we've definitely seen this sort of drop in any sorts of standards when it comes to art, and I see it especially whenever I scroll TikTok. It's all those, you just have like a white, what's it called? Like a canvas. You just have a blank canvas, and they either just like throw paint at it, or just have like the thing with with can of paint, just like swinging from one side to the other, like doing. And oftentimes they make something which looks nice, but again, it's no art. It's completely random. And there's been this thing when if you don't call something art, it's almost like an insult. And I never mean it as an insult. Unless I might sometimes mean it as an insult if it's like too far. But oftentimes, like, you can make good things. It doesn't always have to be art.
Yeah,
What do you think, Joe?
not everything. I mean, I consider myself an artist, but not everything I do is art in the strictest, romantic sense of it. I mean, I like making glass Christmas ornaments and jewelry. That's not the fine art, but I love making it. I just love creating things. So, something that I think a lot of people don't understand about the postmodernists is they literally think that having any representational art is not art. It has to be divorced from perceptional reality or what you'd expect to see. They call anything derived from reality as being contrived and wooden and escapism. I've heard that kind of crap a lot. But so keep in mind that they have to tie art to emotion. And their theory of emotions is that they're not understood, or that they're almost like revelations. And so the less you can understand about yourself and what you're creating, the more profound your art will be. And then you get a critic or some friends to describe what you painted for you, and then you're like, oh yeah, I could see that. That's how a lot of that stuff happens. But they literally don't. They think planning it or thinking about it is being contrived. It has to be completely spontaneous, and to understand where it comes from is to destroy the magic in the art. So, a lot of that underlies the postmodern aesthetics that you see everywhere.
Maybe something
with that, because now you see, like you said, the Turner Prize winner. I saw a story about this and what his exhibit was and everything, or their exhibit, whatever. But yeah, it was ridiculous. It's just a bunch of stuff, junk, scattered all over a room, and it's meant to say all this stuff about United Kingdom politics or something. It literally is a joke. It was pretty bad, actually. So
yeah. One of the things we do is every year we go to the London Art Fair, where galleries from all over the country and Europe gather in a particular place in London and show their art for purchase. And it gives you a good chance to see a broad perspective of what's going on, not just from one gallery, but across a wider sense of the culture. And each year you've seen a gradual degradation in the stuff that gives you even a flicker of interest across the whole, exhibition. And what's interesting to look at in those events is the reaction of the people walking around, the reaction of the general public. Because whether it's the champagne set on the first night, or whether it's the general public further into the several days of this thing, you see the same look in people's eyes all the time. What I want to use the Randian phrase of bovine indifference, and that's exactly sums up what the sort of dead. Moving from one piece to another, absolutely nothing is registering at any level, and they're looking largely at the prices at the bottom of each corner, and whether what's got a spot on it, what's been sold. So it's it's really quite depressing, particularly when you can also see, galleries like Quent Cordair and the work of John Watts, for example. You see how excellent that is. And if that only had one of the stands here in London, you would see such a different reaction. I guarantee it, from the genuine, buying public walking around the exhibition.
Well, I tend to feel very sorry for gallery owners nowadays, because they pour themselves after a certain artist in order to promote them or whatever, and then suddenly a little word published on X, on the privately or whatever, suddenly the art becomes unmarketable because they said the wrong thing. So this whole collectivist, let's run this way, the herd moves back to the other side. You never know where you stand. So I wouldn't be surprised if sooner or later lots of people who paid 3 to 6 figure prices for stuff find themselves owning a big fat zero.
Yeah, you mentioned it, but I wanted to mention it explicitly because maybe some our non-objectivist friends might be asking, well, what if they call all that art? What's really the harm? And the harm is this confusion. If you call everything art, and if you compare, the paintings John Watts does to this sort of just a random piece of scraps of paper on the floor as the same thing, normal people who are not sort of indoctrinated will just look at it and think, well, there's no point in art. I don't understand it. Why would I ever bother with art? And that's such a horrible thing to see, because a good art can be incredible. Can move you in sorts of way you could never imagine. And I sort of had this feeling when I think I was in the National Gallery in the UK, when I went through everything, and most of the stuff I saw there was, frankly, for me, just I couldn't really see what's the point. And it was really sad for me, especially because like I met while I was there, I met a friend, and he had like such a different reaction to everything because he was trained himself for a long time with good art. And if you don't have this sort of good art from the young age, you will lack this sense for good art. So maybe last comment from John or Marco and Richard.
Yeah, I see it all the time where people question the art world. The average person doesn't think they understand art or anything. And I think the downfall, like you said, is that people don't take art seriously, so they no longer will seek it out. Especially when you can easily sit down and watch a movie for practically free, constantly. Like there's endless movies out there and TV. So the fact that all they see, the majority of what you see at art exhibitions or museums is this postmodern anti-reality work. People don't take it seriously, so like I said, they're not going to seek it out, and that's the downfall, is they miss out on the value that certain types of art have to offer. I'm not just talking about visual art, but it seems to be the clearest. I'm just hoping that we're going to get to the end of the road, and I don't know. We've come to the point where they're selling blank canvases as art now. I mean, that's actually happened. And I knew that would, like 15 years ago. I'm like, they just keep deconstructing it to the point where an empty room will be considered a piece of art, and I'm pretty sure it has now. So there is a pushback. There is a realist movement in the art world, like a return to values and beauty, I should say. You just have to look for it. It's out there. The only thing that will keep this postmodern trash alive is very rich people needing to write off some of their money. That's that's honestly has to be where it comes down to. And then there's the fools that believe that they're investing in something that is going to be worth more later. I don't know. Like I said, I think it's come to the end of the road. Even artists who buy into the postmodern thing have to be bored with seeing just junk piled in a room and being told this is something profound that you need to realize. It's going to get old. It's gotta get boring at some point. I gotta hope.
Yeah. You've seen, for example, in there was one European country, I forget which one now, where the government had subsidized a particular artist to produce some pieces for an exhibition, and they turned in some entirely blank canvases, which is effectively flicking the bird to the art world generally and to the government money. But all of it feels like you've reached the bottom and there's no lower in terms of that. And I think when it comes to the investors and those buying into art, many of them are sort of atoning for their guilt at their own wealth, which is another problem with the culture at the moment, by shelling out a load of money on mediocrity and by promoting the underdog as an artist, or trying to aim for equality through what they purchase and what they stick on their walls.
That reminds me a lot of Elzruk Tui's. He makes a statement in the Fountainhead about what good of a critic or purchaser or patron are you if you're just going to promote something that's already good? That's easy. But what if you promote something that's trash and, ugly? Then you're really a successful critic. That's where real power lies. And I think a lot of these rich people see that as they're going to, this poor underdog artist that's never going to succeed because their art is such trash. Well, I can make them a success just by buying one of their paintings for $1 million. Like it's kind of a virtue signal in a way. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. And the level of second-handedness, where who else has bought the art, is also relevant. The Duke of Bedford owns one of these, or it's just been bought by a minor Hollywood actor without naming who it is or being able to prove that fact anyway. And who cares anyway? The art should stand on its own.
Marco, any last words about this topic?
I think the main problem with art is that the interference of education and state intervention. Every time it's another example of a field where the state sticks the big fat fingers in and ends up ruining the whole thing. Most of these lefties are actually subsidized by taxpayers. If they had to live based on what they produce, they would have starved years ago. But this thing keep carrying on because the state steals money from us and diverts it to, the collectivist people that deserve the bidding.
You actually reminded me when I was in the primary school, we had like a drawing class, and with one assignment it was just do whatever. So I just drew like random signs, I just drew random lines, and I was like the best one in the class because of that. Like teacher said that, and yeah, after that I was like, okay, I guess so. I guess you can just luck into this. But we should move on to the next topic. Before we do, let me thank Jonathan. Thank you for your $4.99. Thank you for super chat. So yes, we had this resolution. It's a bipartisan bill. The author is Elise Stefanik. It's about condemning anti-Semitism on university campuses and the testimony of university presidents in the House Committee on Education and the Workforce. So we talked about this specific testimony last week, but we didn't have Marco and Richard. So before we move on to talking about the resolution, Marco and Richard, have you seen the original testimony and what did you think about that?
I personally tried not to watch it because I knew already what they were going to say. They were going just to try and apologize for I don't know what they're trying to apologize for, to be honest. Probably didn't know either. But the bottom line, that they're trying to justify the behavior of the protesters without, of course, taking any responsibility for it, because then you might follow a lawsuit if you do that. But the main thing is that they are trying to conflate an act of aggression towards freedom of speech versus anti-Semitism. I mean, it doesn't take a genius or an expert in law to work out that somebody who chants genocide for the Jews is effectively inciting violence. This is not expressing your opinion. I mean, this goes way beyond expressing your opinion. You're making a statement there whereby everybody who's a Jew should be killed. That's what he's saying. So these guys trying to pretend that the chanting and the slogans in the protests were just expression of their own opinions is just ludicrous. So
yeah, and my take from it was there wasn't a pair of cojones between them, and that's virtual cojones, to be honest, because they were treading and using such woolly language and trying to pussyfoot around and hedge their bets and say neither one thing nor the other, but just sort of get through it without them sticking their necks out or saying anything too profound. And these are supposedly, the leaders of the major institutions in the US that are setting, the agenda for intellectual thought in, the free world. What an indictment that is.
Maybe just a reminder for people what was said in this hearing. Probably the most famous line was when all the presidents, so there were the presidents of the MIT, Harvard, and the University of Pennsylvania. They were asked, does calling for genocide of Jews count as harassment under their schools' policies? And the MIT president, Sally Kornbluth, said, only if it were targeted at individuals. Harvard's president, Claudine Gay, said, depends on the context. And Elizabeth McGill, the president of the University of Pennsylvania, also said it's a context-dependent question. Since then, actually, Elizabeth McGill has resigned, so you've seen at least some form of accountability. But I believe Sally Kornbluth is probably never not gonna resign, and I think neither Claudine Gay is. So John, let's now move on to the actual resolution. What do you think about this bipartisan bill, basically condemning anti-Semitism and also the testimony of the presidents?
Well, I was on the show last week, so I talked about the presidents a little bit, but yeah, they really sound like politicians. They should probably get into politics pretty soon because they'd be really good at it. But yeah, the resolution is nice and everything, but it's just words and whatever. What I would like is to see all the subsidies cut from these universities, because right now they're getting billions from us by force to support these ideas, and they should not get a dime from me or anyone. So I don't know. The resolution is nice, like I said, but it's just talk. And I don't think that the government should do much to the universities other than withdraw their subsidies. So I don't know. And then the article in Al Jazeera about it was ridiculous. They were trying to downplay anti-Semitism and then hide behind free speech as if Al Jazeera cares about free speech. I'd like to know the last article where they talked about free speech problems in any one of the Islamic states that are in the Middle East. But yeah, of course, America's got a huge problem with free speech because of this. But it really has nothing to do with free speech. It's so many are trying to push the idea that only unmoderated speech can be free speech. But yes, you have free speech to say what you want, but you can't say what you want wherever you want. The line is private property. And so, but with the government subsidizing everything, that line is pretty much pretty blurry right now, and it's really hard to pull this stuff apart. So the only thing I can say is stop subsidizing them. I'm glad that there are lots of donors cutting. I've seen lots of donors cutting funding and everything. But yeah, you're right. The president of Harvard is not resigning. They're supposedly got hundreds of letters from professors saying supporting her, and so the board did decide to keep her on. So hopefully then it goes to the funders to start pulling that money from them.
So you mentioned the resolution itself, and maybe just to bring a bit more context, because you said you've read the Al Jazeera article. I think I read the NBC News one, and in that article it said they are also calling for resignation of those presidents, which is not true. So I have no idea why it's there. The resolution is basically like a UN resolution condemning Israel. It doesn't really mean anything. It makes us feel maybe a bit better. Well, from the other side, but it has no. It doesn't even in the resolution. It doesn't call for any resignation, and I don't think government can even force these universities. At the end of the day, are private institutions as they should be, and yeah, it's sad to see that they are getting the funding from the US government, especially it's especially outrageous when they have such policies, or rather lack of policies when it comes to anti-Semitism. But let me go to Marco. What did you think about this resolution?
Well, yeah, it legally doesn't have any weight, but we are in a mixed economy where the government actually decides whether their funds will go or not to this institution. So this institution effectively have been sent a coded message saying, "I don't like what you're doing, change it, or either going to legislate against you, or I'm not going to give you the money I was going to give you." That's exactly the same stuff that the US government did during the COVID stuff when they were censoring, forcing social media companies to lean towards the direction they wanted them to go by threatening them with regulation. So the state, if they write you an angry letter saying that they're disappointed with you, you should really listen. We're not in a free market. The state has got tentacles everywhere. So if you want to survive, you have to listen to the big nasty blob.
I think it was particularly depressing in that Harvard case to see how, as John referred to there, how many I've read between 500 and 700 members of staff came out in support of the Harvard, the top woman at Harvard, and that shows how deep the rot is. It shows you're not just talking about one individual who's managed to get to the top with a certain activist perspective. You're talking about a systemic problem. So the only route out of that is donors seeing the light and choosing not to fund their alma maters as they might have done in previous years.
Yeah, and some enlightened student realizes that if I had to spend my money in this kind of institution, I might well go somewhere perhaps it cost a bit less or whatever, and
In terms of reading Al Jazeera's perspective on it, particularly since it's not a news organization I go to in any form ever, so seeing it in this form, I was actually quite surprised of how that article could have come straight out of the Guardian or pretty much straight out of the BBC. There was nothing in there particularly that made it super different to what you can read in either of those two left-wing organizations here in the UK. So that goes to show how prevalent that side of the argument is in media outlets generally.
Yeah, so maybe just to sum up basically this whole problem, the big problem is always the mixed economy. When you have this sort of pulls and levers, both regulations and subsidies, both tax breaks and tax benefits, you always run into this problem where government has to decide who to send the money to, and whenever it starts using some sort of ideological grounds for either supporting an organization or not, even if it might benefit me in this case, like I would love if these really prestigious universities such as MIT and Harvard had actually fought against anti-Semitism on their universities. I'm always wary whenever government wants to step in, and even cutting funding is always for me like either be completely indiscriminate or just give it to everyone, or don't give, well, ideally don't give it to anyone. But whenever we are in this situation, I'm never sure. Like, I don't want to make it. Like, I wouldn't want to make a decision when it comes to this, unless I could completely step away from all of this.
Well, if you start considering giving out subsidies, what's the criteria? Are you gonna give it to somebody because they got lots of white people, lots of black people, lots of yellow people, blue people? I mean, what do you stop? And that's the problem. That's why the government should just back off, totally be removed from the economy, from religion, from basically everything which is not involved into protecting individual rights. Everything else should be off limits for the state.
Okay, any last words on this topic? I don't have anything else to say.
I would just note that I noticed that Antony Blinken went first to the Qataris shortly after October 7th to encourage them, surely unsuccessfully, but to arm twist them to tone down some of their Al Jazeera coverage for risk of inflaming tensions. I suspect that got nowhere and never will.
John?
Yeah, I don't have too much to say. I just, I agree. I don't think anything should be subsidized. But I do think, as a taxpayer, the one funding these colleges, I do have a right to know what's going on. So I'm grateful that this was all exposed, that it's a lot of people, I think, have been woken up as to how deep the rot is in the universities. And if anything comes out of it, I hope that's the main thing. I mean, my money's taken from me already, so I'm harmed once. And then for the money to be given subsidizing such evil ideas harms me again. So I feel I should have some sort of say in the second form of harming if I can, but I don't agree that the colleges should be shut down or anything like that. Just defunded. That's it.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to remember where exactly Ayn Rand talked about fueling your own destroyers.
Right.
It's one thing fueling them by voluntary donations, which I think she specifically talked about businessmen kind of fueling hate against themselves. But it's doubly outrageous when you are forced to fund, to basically give money to the ideas you ideologically oppose. Marco, anything? Any last
I think
words?
we covered it all, haven't we?
Yeah, but that particular speech, I think you're talking about the sanction of the victim. What the last speech she gave, last public speech, that is definitely opposite here.
Okay, so let me end with the upcoming shows. So in about 10 minutes, there's going to be a briefly objective premiere. It's going to be with James Valiant. It's going to be from the video when him and Razi have talked about Finkelstein. And this video is called Finkelstein, the Intellectual Criminal. So make sure to check it out. It's going to premiere in 10 minutes. Link is in the chat. And we should see you tomorrow with another episode of the Daily Objective and of the reality show. Thank you and bye-bye.